You're watching a Satluj TV news special. I'm Angus Scott in London. As India grows in confidence on the world stage, the nation is increasingly flexing its muscle and influence amongst its global peers. In turn, other nations are recognising the significance of the newly emerging superpower and are keen to tie up alliances with India at all levels. Of course, this includes economically to exploit its population of 1.4 billion people, a vast potential market for goods and services. But also from a military perspective, with China's increasingly bold ambitions outside its own borders, India has become a de facto counterweight in Asia, and as such is courted by the US and other nations to forge alliances in an attempt to balance the scales against these Chinese aspirations. But like all geopolitical issues, the situation is never simple black and white. On the one hand, we have an emergent and ambitious India, the second fastest growing nation in the G20, with the future at its feet. And on the other, mature and successful nations keen to buddy up with this rising star. And so it was this week, India Prime Minister Narendra Modi was treated to a lavish rockstar welcome as he arrived in Australia, and amongst this international festival of mutual backslapping in front of the world's cameras, and lucrative deals signed for the benefit of both sides, the deep underlying issues that directly affect the common person were quietly brushed under the carpet in the name of real politik. Even as Australia Prime Minister Anthony Albanese visibly batted away questions about India's treatment of opponents and minorities, suggesting there were simply domestic issues, Modi in turn warned that separatist elements should not be allowed to hurt India-Australia relations. Modi did hit out at recent attacks on Hindu temples in Australia, vandalism allegedly committed by Sikh separatists, after his summit with Albanese at Admiralty House in Sydney Harbour. Anti-Modi graffiti has this year been painted on a half-dozen temples in Australia, which Indian media have blamed on pro-Khalistan activists. Which of course in turn offered the Australian Prime Minister the perfect opportunity to raise the issue of the Indian government's discrimination against the country's hundreds of millions of non-Hindus. As a relatively young nation, but renowned for its democratic values, Australians have always exuded a sense of innate social fairness, usually never afraid to call out injustice whenever they see it. And so, under the gaze of the world's cameras and the lure of the multi-trillion-dollar market on offer, as he was interrogated by the world's press about such matters, Albanese simply dismissed the well-publicised human rights abuses witnessed in India as a simple domestic issue. And in the same breath promised his Indian counterpart his government would similarly crack down on Indian separatists in Australia. Which highlights the perpetual dilemma that global leaders are persistently burdened with, and of course the treacherous path that they are forever forced to follow. Pushed from behind by domestic political pressures to keep their own voting public on side, they also find themselves sacrificing, or at least reshaping, their own democratic principles as the price for tying up these international alliances. Rights groups say India's 200 million Muslims have faced increased discrimination and violence since Modi and his Hindu nationalist BJP swept to power in 2014. And according to Human Rights Watch, under Modi, the world's largest democracy has become much less free and more dangerous for his critics. So, whilst Prime Minister Modi's ambitions for India remain laudable as he undoubtedly nurtures this great nation as a future superpower, governing the world's largest democracy carries with it a responsibility to ensure all of its people are treated equally and given equal voice. And in turn, other world leaders like Australian Prime Minister Albanese have a similar responsibility to call out injustice and democratic failings amongst their peers whenever they see it. As India and Australia tie up their alliances on several levels in the coming days, and the world's press no doubt announce the great successes achieved during Modi's visit, what won't be reported is the deep failure of two so-called democracies quietly brushing human rights under the carpet in the name of international diplomacy. You've been watching a Satluj TV News special, and you can find more stories in detail on our channel Satnet News, so it's worth clicking on that subscribe button to make sure you get to see stories as they're broadcast. And don't forget, if you have any comments or opinions on any of our news stories, you can comment below, or indeed drop us a direct message at message@satlujtv.com. We'd love to hear from you. In the meantime, thanks for watching. For Satluj TV News, I'm Angus Scott in London.